Venice is a very difficult place not to make documentaries about. Everyone has done it. Everyone's been here. Shelley wrote poems here. Ruskin bought a house here. Byron swam the Grand Canal here. Browning made love here. Hemingway got drunk here. Everyone took away a bit of Venice in his heart, except me. And now there's not much time. Let's take a stroll down Main Street.
It really is a bit much for a city to have a main street like this. The Grand Canal, that's not only absurdly beautiful, but commercially central too. One isn't used to things that are at the same time useful and lovely. It'll go, of course, as all Venice will go, as we'll go, under the imperatives of nature and progress. But in the meantime, the Grand Canal isn't an archaism, it isn't a relic for the tourist, it's a practical street. Everything that Venice means began here. 46 little side canals join it, like byroads anywhere. And 200 great palaces line its banks up to their ankles in water, dreaming of past glories and future grants. 3 bridges only span the Grand Canal, of which, of course, the most resoundingly illustrious is that fabulous arc of Shakespeare's memory, the Rialto, the great stock exchange of the 15th century, where Shylock checked his loans and 8 generations of Venetians watched the stock market. What's new on the Rialto? Nothing. Nothing.
These strange, familiar byways are still the only thoroughfares of Venice, meandering, awkward, tranquil, with a consoling inconvenience. There's a civility about the traffic problems among these liquid lanes and watery walls, behind which people take to higher and higher floors. It was a great place once, one of the world's greatest, a city of rich grandeur and renown. Think of that past of opulence and luxury, those doges and patricians, the sumptuous delights, the 11,000 courtesans and 20,000 spies. It is incredibly true that this whole ancient city was built on a foundation of old bits of wood, millions of timber stakes driven into a swamp of mud. Therefore, it's sinking. Lower and lower it goes each year. Higher and higher the water rises, lapping gently and hungrily up the hemline of the city it will one day have forever.
Among other things, Venice invented the ghetto. This intensely civilized and cultivated state was the first one to hit on the notion of physically isolating a society of people that it simultaneously despised and needed. In this, as in so many other things, Venice led the world. The Jews came to Venice in the 1370s as refugees, naturally, and by, a century later, the Doges invented for them the world's very first ghetto, which may not be much of a distinction, but is at least characteristically original. In this ghetto, the Jews had to wear conspicuous red hats, and they were extortionately taxed for the privilege of being locked in at sunset, and indeed they had to pay the wages of the Christian guards who kept them there. But naturally, in the perverse Venetian way, they were also protected with curious privileges. The Venetian Jews were, after all, the great financiers of their time, and they turned Venice into the sort of Zurich of the period.
The other thing that Venice invented uniquely for its own purposes was, of course, the gondola, gliding about these shallow canals unchanged for 900 years. Unchanged not because it's pretty, which it is, but because its design is wholly and completely functional. The gondola is unchanged because it is precisely right, with its exactly 280 pieces of wood of 7 different timbers, exactly 33 feet long and 4.5 feet wide, with its queer, lopsided keel 2/3 across the middle to counteract the dynamic of the oar. Every immutable detail as it was in the beginning and is now at a cost of £700. Maybe it is a challenge that they still make gondolas. The fact is, it's the only practical way to get about. It costs a couple of pennies to get across. When winter comes and the tourists go home, the population of Venice drops by 3/4. Then Venice becomes again a small town with a small time's life and preoccupation, with all the vast historic mercantile traditions of the Venetian Empire reduced and concentrated into the housewives buying and selling in the marketplace. This was the city that traded in the world's fortunes. This was the city that provisioned the Crusades. Now, in the shadow of the Rialto Bridge itself, Venice bargains over a kilo of scampi from the lagoon. What a wonderfully wholesome thing it is to have a city of pedestrians. No streets, and therefore no cars, thank God, no cars. Venetians either walk or boat. Life is conditioned to this tangled maze of alleys and quays and bridges, 500 bridges, more to the square mile than anywhere else on earth. Venice is something almost biological, with the canals as the blood vessels, the squares as the lungs, and the rise and fall of the tides as the pulse of the heart. It seems that, like all organic things, Venice is mortal. Now the year dies away in the grey tones of winter. Venice is now an aging hostess to an aging people, and their numbers diminish all the time. Their children go away to the mainland, where there's work and cars and modern plumbing. Each year, 1 in every 3 Venetians decides that there is little reason to stay. They don't want to live on tourist handouts half the year and phantoms for the rest, waiting for the end of the line, the journey across the lagoon to the island cemetery of San Michele.